Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to another installment of Reality Bites. We are in our series on David. We started last week on Friday talking about David being a man after God's own heart. We opened up a few ideas about that. We threw around a few thoughts to direct us and how we can be men and women after God's own heart. But today, while I was looking, I said, you know what? I think I may have set myself up for failure because David has such a huge lifespan, lots of monumental moments that need to be taken note of and that are valuable teaching lessons. But I only gave myself Friday and this week. So 6 days total. So here it is. We're not going to make it all the way through David. Big surprise. But we will get some valuable teaching points out of his life, at least some parts of his life. Today we're going to talk about his choosing or how he was chosen even to be king. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, you can read this at your leisure, but we're going to talk through verse 6, verse 7, and verse 12 and kind of get some important points about that. Because we want to talk about how we choose, how God chooses. And if we want to be men and women after God's own heart, it's important that we even learn how to make selections, how to make choices, how to choose what's best for us, what's best for our situation, and even see how God chooses us. So it's a two-sided choosing. It's how we see that God chooses us and how we then can choose other things for our life and our situation and determining what we want to bring into our world. So we look in chapter 17, 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 6, verse 7, and verse 12. We have here where Saul's been rejected. So God says, yo, Samuel, go out. And he doesn't say, yo, Samuel, but he says, go find another king for me. I've chosen him out of the house of Jesse. So he goes to Jesse's house and says, hey, Jesse, let's have a party. Let's find your sons and see who's going to be the next king of Israel. So he brings out his sons. He begins to parade his sons. Now, keep in mind, spoiler alert, he has 8 sons, but he brings out 7. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. But today, he brings out 7 sons. And Samuel, the prophet, begins to look through these sons to choose a successor to King Saul. And the first son he sees is Jesse's boy by the name of Eliab. He says, whoa, surely he's the anointed one of God. Surely he's the one that's supposed to be on the throne. Because it comes out talking about him being handsome and him having a certain look and stature. And God says, I have rejected him. He's not chosen. He is not the one that's supposed to be king. And then this is a very famous verse we kind of hone in on many times in Christendom when it comes to how we choose. He says that man chooses on the outer, but God looks on the inside. So basically he's saying that, Samuel, I don't choose like you choose. You may look on the outside or you may look at an outward appearance, but I don't choose that way. Now, the thing that's confusing to some people is you may have missed this all your years of reading this particular section of verses, but in verse 12, he chose David, and God says that was his choice. But it comes out and says David was dark and handsome. Clark Gable, I don't know. But dark and handsome, beautiful eyes. And God said, that's my anointed. That's my chosen one. That's who's supposed to be the next king of Israel. That's supposed to be the giant slayer of Goliath. That's supposed to be the one that brings the Ark of the Covenant back. But listen, the Bible said in verse 12 that he was dark and handsome and had beautiful eyes. So he was not bad on the eyes. He was not a non-handsome individual. He was handsome. And so you may say, God, you're a hypocrite because you say you don't choose by that. God never said that the choice would not be something to look like could be, but he said that's not his selection criteria. And we have other few ways of phrasing that. Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't despise the gift because you don't like the wrapping paper. All kinds of different things. But God says, that's not my criteria. He might have been handsome. He might have been what you have chosen, but that's not how I choose. So we wouldn't look and say, God chooses on the inside. God says, I choose by the content. I choose by something that's on the inside. I choose by the heart. That's my choice. And we talked about last week that we're trying to be men and women after God's own heart. So what we have to do is we need to go back and listen to Friday and implement some of what we found out makes us God's heart chasers. We need to implement those things into our lives, and then we can figure out how God chooses and what we need to have in us to be chosen by the Lord. When he said he chooses by the heart and not by the look, you may be handsome, you may be attractive, you may be all these things, and that can or cannot be your reason to be chosen. He chooses by the heart. So if your heart is right, you may be attractive, you may not be, but that doesn't. That's not what his choice hinges on. So here it is. If I'm looking to say, God, choose me by my heart. Choose me by my heart. It has to do with our intention, our focus, our attention, and what we hold dear to us, what we speak, what we think. All these things are what pour out of our heart, what signify, make up our heart. So if these things are out of touch or off kilter or any way not something that lines up with what God is saying and wanting and needing from us, that can make or break his choosing of us. So we need to look at how our heart is. I want to be chosen by God. I want to be chosen by God. That's what we all say. We want to be chosen by God for favor, for position. And that's great. That's fine. But we also maybe want to look at wanting to be chosen, because later we find out that David didn't want to be chosen, but that's another story for another day. But today we want to focus on your heart. So before I leave you today and I go about my day and send you about yours, remember, God chooses on the heart. So stop trying to get your outside all together and get yourself all fine and all handsome and attractive. That's great. It works. If you're doing it for your own self, that's fine. But that's not God's criteria. That the eyelashes and the extensions and the weaves and the muscles and all this great wardrobe, that's not going to get you chosen by God. What gets you chosen by God is the heart. So as opposed to working on all that other stuff, work on your heart. I'll leave you with this example. A movie came out some time ago with Jack Black starring in it, called Shallow Hal. And the woman who played his love interest was Gwyneth Paltrow. And in reality, she was overweight, was unattractive, but because of her heart, he saw her in a way that was far more attractive than anybody else. And one of the girls in the movie that was very attractive, her heart was ugly. So when he saw her, he saw like an old witch, old hag kind of looking individual. So if anything, we need to be like Shallow Hal and look at and have our hearts changed so that when people see you, when God sees you, you may not look like everyone thinks you ought to look on the outside. But when God sees you and people see you, they're blown away by your heart. So let's work on our heart, people. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow for our next day of Reality Bites on our series of David. See you then. Have a good one. Bye-bye.